So listen, take us back a bit. I mean, you've had this incredible career, but when did it all begin? When did you know that you wanted to be a photographer?
So I started photographing when I was about 12 or 13, but I never wanted to be a photographer. I was really adamant that I wanted to do something else, something more intellectual. And I had no role models, actually. I didn't know of any photojournalists. I didn't understand that there was actually this profession where you can have this great marriage of an art and something and a storytelling, a way of storytelling. And so it wasn't until after I graduated from university where I studied international relations, and I moved to Argentina to learn Spanish. And there I sort of became aware of pictures in the newspaper, and I went to a Sebastian Salgado exhibit, and I was completely blown away by the power of his images. And I sort of made a decision that this is what I wanted to do, and I haven't looked back since. So I'm 41, so it's 20 years ago.
So that was your kind of your sort of lightning bolt moment, or your kind of light bulb moment. How did you go about actually achieving it? I mean, you know, would you have known where to start? As you say, it's not like you had tons of role models around.
Yeah, no, I didn't really know. I sort of just followed my curiosity. I stayed in Argentina for about 9 months. I started working for the local English newspaper there. I was sort of went in there every day and begged them for a job until finally they got so sick of me that they gave me a job. And then I moved to New York and again went into every single publication and wire service and just said, I really want to photograph. And I kept doing that, and eventually I started working consistently with the Associated Press in New York. And in 2000, so about 3 years later, I moved to India and based myself overseas. And there I started covering Afghanistan under the Taliban and how women lived under the Taliban. And then it really was a combination of curiosity and what was topical, and so I would just do stories based on that.
I mean, the interplay of your career and your gender must be an interesting one for you to see. You know, as you say, you know, especially working, for example, in Afghanistan, your gender must be an asset there because it takes you places that you can't go otherwise.
Yeah, everyone always asks me, you know, isn't it a liability to be a woman? And in fact, no, it's a great asset because first of all, I work mostly in the Muslim world, and those societies are often segregated, and so I have access to men and women. I'm sort of this odd third sex as a Western journalist, and so I can access everybody. And I find often actually in war zones, people really underestimate me, and so I'm able to move around kind of in a more subtle way.
Okay. I mean, obviously, as you say, you know, you have been in some of the most severe conflict zones in the world. Darfur, Afghanistan, Syria, the Congo. What was your first trip to a war zone? When did you first go in?
I guess when I was working in Afghanistan under the Taliban, there wasn't combat, but it was really a place that had suffered from 20 years of war already, and there were no embassies. There were none of the typical structures we rely on in times of need. For example, the hospitals were basically empty. There was no medicine, no doctors, so if something happened, there was nowhere to go. But it wasn't until 2003 when I went in to cover the war in Iraq. And I went in to northern Iraq and made my way. When Saddam Hussein fell, I went down to Baghdad through various cities and was working not only with the troops, but the different militias and covering the insurgency. And I stayed for almost 2 years in Iraq at that point, and also simultaneously started covering Darfur and then Congo and Libya, Lebanon, the rest.
Is there any kind of training that you can have that can even begin to prepare you for the kind of situations that you would find yourself in?
Yeah, there is training available. I could never afford it when I was starting out, so I was always poor for a long, long time, so I could never pay $5,000 for a week of what to do if you get kidnapped. And in fact, by the time I started making money, I had already been kidnapped, so I just thought, like, okay, I can probably teach the course. So I didn't, you know, for me it was really instinctual and learning from elders, learning from other journalists who were more seasoned and who had been doing it for a long time.
As you mentioned, you've been in some very tricky situations, including being kidnapped. I mean, that must have been a horrendous experience. What did you take from it, and how did you move past it?
I mean, I think, I've been kidnapped twice. The first time was in Iraq. I know, you don't want to hang out with me very long. The first time was in Iraq in 2004, and frankly, it was at the very beginning of kidnappings of foreigners. So had we had more information, we probably would have been more terrified. But it was, obviously, we both thought we were going to be killed. We were stopped on a smuggler's route on a road, stopped by about 20 to 30 gunmen with rockets on their backs and guns. And for the better part of a day, we were questioned. What were we doing there? Were we part of the occupation in Iraq? What was our goal of being in that area? It was a Sunni insurgency stronghold, so they wondered why we were there, and we explained that we were journalists and we were simply there to tell their side of the story. And so eventually we were released, but of course you never know. The thing about being detained or being kidnapped is that every single second you can go either way. So you never have any security in knowing that you might survive until you actually get out. The second experience was in Libya during the uprising in 2011. I was covering the popular uprising during the Arab Spring in Libya, and I was working with 3 colleagues for the New York Times, and we were covering the front line. So for about 2 weeks, I was covering the fighting, and it was very, very heavy combat. And I was actually on my way back to Benghazi to rest a little bit, and I stayed one more day with my colleague and friend Tyler Hicks, who I actually grew up with. And that day, we were in the city of Ajdabia, and it was clearly about to fall to Gaddafi's forces. They were coming in very quickly. There are signs when you're a journalist to know when a city is going to fall, like mortar rounds and everything, civilians fleeing and stuff. And basically, we stayed too long. I mean, there were 4 of us in the car at that point, 4 New York Times journalists and a driver. And we stayed too long, and we ran into one of Gaddafi's checkpoints. They had, rather than coming from behind us, they sort of went around the desert, flanked the desert, and then cut the road in front of us, and we ran into a hostile checkpoint. And it was terrifying. It was about a week of being tied up, blindfolded, beaten up repeatedly. For me as a woman, I was groped basically by every single soldier in Libya. And it went on, and we were threatened with execution pretty much a few times a day.
Wow. I mean, how do you even begin to recover from an experience like that?
You know, I think when you do this job for a living, you sort of accept these things as part of the job, and these are things that could happen. We all knew the possibilities of running into a Gaddafi checkpoint, working in Libya at that time, and I think it's very important to be aware of what might happen and to try and avoid that, obviously. But I think at certain times you make bad judgment calls, and at certain times maybe the front line shifts faster than you think. But it's not a total surprise. It's not like I think I'm working in Portugal, you know. I mean, I know I'm in Libya. I know I'm covering an uprising, and I know what the possibilities are.
Thank you very much, Lynsey Addario, everyone. I'm now going to welcome to the stage, now I've got someone to ask you some questions. This is Iona Wolfe. Come up, Iona. She's a freelance journalist. She's been working in London for a year and already has clients including the Evening Standard, the Craft Council UK and Max Mara. Hello, Iona.
Hi. So this is a really lovely big quote, kind of personal, and this is it. Real love should complement my work, not take away from it. And I just want to know, exactly what you're...
Well, I think when, hopefully you guys will buy the book, and if you read it, you'll see that I do try, I'm always sort of open to being in love, but I always know that in my heart, my true love for many, many years was work. And so I was sort of half-heartedly giving myself to all these things, and very unsuccessfully. And so finally, when I met my husband, there was automatically this sort of effortless, actually this works and it fits, and I don't always feel like I'm failing him as a girlfriend and failing, and you know, and so I realized that actually it was love, because it was for the first time I felt something that worked, and we really loved each other. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Perfect.
That's all we've
Thank
got time
you.
for. You've been
Thank
absolutely
you.
brilliant.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Iona. But of course, thank you so much. Most of all, Lynsey Addario, everybody. Thank you.